This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I am your host for this installment, Juliet Helmke, part of the team who brings you all of the news on property over at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Today we have a great show for you. We're talking about market conditions for the year ahead, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Diaswati Mardiasmo, Chief Economist at PRD. Welcome to the show, Asti. I know this is not your first go-around, so it's a pleasure to have you back.
Hello, Juliet. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, and I am so well, and I hope you are too. We are just thrilled to be having this conversation. We know PRD has just released the latest in its quarterly market reports, focusing on where consumers might want to look if they're chasing affordability, but also livability. And Asti, we love these reports. We love them when you bring these out. It's always so dense and full of really rich information that can help consumers figure out some of their options if they are looking to buy, but also it provides a lot of great insight for real estate professionals out there as well to keep their pulse on the market. So we just find them so fascinating. We've really enjoyed reading through this one. We've covered it a bit on the site already. So for our listeners, there are some things that you can check out there. You can do some reading on what the report entails, but we're here to dig into some of the findings. Now, before we do though, Asti, I know livability and affordability, these are such important aspects. They can be defined in a lot of different ways. So tell me, how do you define these factors for the purpose of the report?
Absolutely, Juliet. There are so many different definitions of affordability and livability out there. And so it is definitely very important for us to really dig into what it means for this particular report. And the one thing that I do want to say, when it comes to affordability, it comes into a spectrum, right? And with this particular report, we don't define affordability as the cheapest suburbs. And the reason why we don't do that is because we have to balance it out with livability. So for us, affordability means that it's suburbs that has a median house or a median unit price that is lower than the relevant capital city. So, for example, if we're talking about Sydney, then we're talking about suburbs that has a lower median house price or a median unit price than the Sydney Metro median house, median unit price. Same thing for Brisbane, same thing for Melbourne, and same thing for Hobart. So that's our definition of affordability. And of course, there's hundreds and hundreds of suburbs that we went through to be able to pick out kind of like the creme de la creme sort of thing. And throughout that time, picking them out, we do try to get them as affordable as possible because we do know there's a lot of things going on at the moment with cost of living and property prices and higher interest rates and things like that. So say, for example, Sydney's median house price is about 1.5 at the moment. If we do see a suburb that is affordable, so say in the 1 million or 900, we try to go as lower as possible as long as it meets the livability criteria. Now, the livability criteria that we talk about, we've actually, to be honest with you, we've made it quite simple in the sense that for us, livable simply means that you are within 5 kilometers from a school. So, we have children, your kids can go to school. There's some sort of medical facility, whether it's doctors or hospitals or an emergency, any of those type of things, pharmacy. There's some sort of shopping. Groceries, Aldi, Kmart, local shops, fish and chips, that kind of thing. Green space and also public transport. So you're able to commute to work if you need to. You can go to the park, you can get your shopping, you can go to the doctor, and you can send your children to school. One of the things that we love about this is that when it comes to livability, we understand that livability means different things to different people, but we believe that these are the basics that most people or most families would need.
Right. And those are really important from a physical, how you go about your daily life perspective. It's not to say that areas without these things don't have their own charm. Certainly, we look at rural living. These can be very far away from certain amenities. There's lots to go for it there. But I think what's interesting about this is we talk about livability. One, because if you're thinking about where you live, it's about what makes your life sort of easier and able to go about your business and have a community around you. But it's also important, isn't it, from an investment standpoint? These are strong investment fundamentals to consider.
Definitely. Because at the end of the day, if you are an investor, the one thing that I've noticed, because I'm a landlord myself, so I invest in property myself. And, the first thing that renters ask is it easy for us to get to the city? Is it easy for us to go on the train or on the bus or whatever it might be? Is it easy for us to be able to get our groceries? Those are usually literally the key things that renters always ask investors. And with this particular report, the other part that we've actually ensured directed to investors is that we've ensured that the suburbs that we choose have a higher or on par rental yield to the capital cities, as well as a lower or on par vacancy rate. Because for an investor, these are your two key indicators, right? Your rental yield tells you how much returns that your property is going to give you. And more importantly, vacancy rate means how quick your property is going to be rented. So this is why when it comes to affordability, in this sense, it's not just about identifying the cheapest suburbs. It's also identifying suburbs that are, yes, they're more affordable than the median capital city price. They're good for investment, for investors out there. And it's also good if you are a first home buyer, for example, or an owner occupier wanting to live in that particular area.
Absolutely. And you've been looking at these factors for quite some time. How many of these reports, or how long have you been tracking some of these factors now?
Oh, wow. That's going to show my age, Juliet. So we've been doing these reports since late 2014. So I think the second half 2024, if 2014, this is like a 10-year anniversary for these reports.
That's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Which, shows how long that we've been tracking these reports, right? And what we've done is we've always sort of modified the livability depending on what is needed in the economic conditions at the time. And that's why for this one, we've actually kind of made it a little bit harder for ourselves because we also layer project development into our choice. And it's not just any projects, because obviously a lot of places can have more infrastructure or more commercial projects, which ensures that any investment in that area will keep on growing and the suburb keep on growing and grows bigger. But we've also layered ensuring that there is some incoming new stock into the area. We know that there is a supply crisis at the moment. We hear from on the ground of people getting really frustrated that they can't find new houses or new townhouses in particular suburbs, that the stock is a little bit older, all of those sorts of things. So we've layered in that other criteria is to ensure that there is some sort of new housing that is planned for the area in 2024 and 2025. Whether that's new units or new townhouses or new standalone dwellings, but basically some form of residential development.
Right. So that if you're saying, these could be places that you want to look, there's a level of a pipeline there so that if it does attract interest, people have options. It's not that everything just gets snapped up and all of a sudden it's on to the next thing.
Exactly. We hear it all the time from our customers, right? Like they sort of go, oh, okay, you're sending me to a suburb that is quite far away with nothing happening and there's no new projects. There's nothing lively happening in that area. There's no new blood going into the area. And so we've taken that feedback and that's how we have created the methodology for these reports is that every single year we take into account what is happening in the economy, people's feedback on what they're seeing on the ground, and we create a specific methodology where every single suburb is put through as we're choosing which suburbs make the cut, so to speak. So
and you've been doing it for 10 years now, so we know that you are pros over there at really doing this analysis. Look, I know our listeners are eager to hear what you found this time around. We will jump into all of those results after a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Top 100 Agents, where I am talking to Diaswati Mardiasmo, Chief Economist of PRD, and she is about to reveal to us some of the big findings of their latest affordability and livability report. Prior to the break, Asti, we were sort of setting the foundation so people can understand what it is we're looking at here. But let's jump in. What did you find? What areas across the capitals that you examined, so that's Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Hobart, are affordable and livable? I'm sure people would love to hear some of the things that stood out.
So there are a couple of things that definitely stood out. The first one that did stand out was that what we look at is definitely how many affordable suburbs for houses there are in a particular capital city. So that simply means the number of suburbs from the capital city, 20K out, that has a median house price or a median unit price that is lower than the relevant capital city. So for Brisbane, about 29.7% of Brisbane suburbs are considered affordable. Mm-hmm. So they have a median house price that is lower than the Brisbane metro of about $1 million. Right? So anything that is, say, 700, 600, we call them an affordable suburb because it's under that $1 million. So 29.7% of Brisbane is considered affordable. Whereas this time around, because of the property conditions in Melbourne and around the suburbs in Melbourne, 34.5% of Melbourne suburbs are considered affordable. So 34.5% of suburbs, Melbourne 20K plus, is under $1.1 million. Mm-hmm. So already there's a neck and neck pricing between Brisbane and Melbourne. And we've heard in the media quite a lot of how Brisbane have overtaken Melbourne. Melbourne has made a slight comeback, as you can see. Now Melbourne's a little bit more expensive than Brisbane, but again, still neck and neck. But because there's been so much growth within Brisbane suburbs, now there's actually more affordable suburbs in Melbourne than there are in Brisbane. And that is something that has not happened for a long time. It's really never happened, which kind of really points out to that affordability in Brisbane has really declined quite severely. You know, as you said, I've been doing these reports for about 10 years. And I remember before COVID, I was already saying to people going, oh my God, only 50% of Brisbane suburbs are now affordable. Whereas normally it's at, you know, when I first started tracking it in about 2014, 2015, about 75% of Brisbane suburbs are affordable. It went down to about 50% just before COVID, and now it's down again to 29.7%. So when it comes to affordability, there's definitely really been a big decline in affordability in Brisbane. Whereas on the other hand, the ones that used to be known as a more expensive capital city, like Melbourne, for example, now has a higher percentage than Brisbane of affordable suburbs. Even Sydney, Sydney is still the smallest percentage out of all of the affordable suburbs. There's only 12.1% of Sydney suburbs that is under 1.5 million. Which is the Sydney Metro Capital median house price. But that in itself has actually improved. I remember before COVID, it was at about 7-8%. And then after COVID, it went to 10%. And now it's gone up to 12.1%. So even though Sydney still has the smallest percentage between Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Hobart, it is along that same path line of increasing the number of or percentage of affordable suburbs just the way that Melbourne has. So to me, that's a really, really interesting finding and an intricate one in comparison between Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne, right? That'll be the first one. And the second one is that, a lot of people have been saying that the future of Australia is living in units. And this particular data pretty much shows that if you do want to be able to afford or have a better chance at living in a particular capital city, it definitely is units. The only one where there is a similar sort of percentage in affordable suburbs is Hobart. It's roughly similar between houses and units, so you've still got a choice there. But for Sydney, for example, 12.1% is affordable houses, but 41.4% is affordable units. Same thing with Brisbane, 29.7% affordable houses and 60.3% affordable units. So basically double or triple the chances if you do want to go for units. So I'd say that's probably a couple of very, very interesting findings that we've got from this particular report.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that apartment aspect particularly speaks to a lot of what we are hearing right now, which is that in Australia's capitals, there is and needs to continue to be an embrace of higher density living to be able to accommodate those populations. And that is sort of, coming up against a little bit the idea of buying property, and that means a house with a bit of a yard and your own plot of land. And I think we are seeing perceptions start to change around that, particularly when people go, well, if it's the choice between buying and not buying, and that's something I'd like to do, the apartment market is a place where I can get in.
Oh, for sure. And if we look at apartments now are very different to apartments, say, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yes.
If I look at some of the stock that is available on the market right now, I remember when I bought my investment property back in 2016, when my daughter was born, it was a 3-bedroom apartment, and I was already amazed at the fact that it had a rooftop pool, right? And like a little bit of a barbecue area. And that's kind of like around 2016, that's the sort of stock that you have. And before that, you're lucky if you have some sort of a pool somewhere in the apartment block. Whereas now, if I look at some of the apartments that are going up, oh my goodness, it's like a one-stop shop.
Absolutely.
One of the apartments that I love that I'm actually looking into buying, it has a croissant place and a coffee place downstairs. It has a sauna, it has a gym, it has a Pilates and a yoga studio. It has like a cinema upstairs, a private dining area, a private garden, private pool. So it's almost like if you are going to be raising a family, for example, and we're seeing this trend in Brisbane already, where families are choosing to go into a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom. I've even seen some stock that are 4-bedroom units available. They're starting to choose to be living in these places because to them, it's kind of like, okay, so maybe it's a little bit more expensive than, say, if I was to go for a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, but the travel time between the suburb where there is a house that is 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms is sometimes outside of the 20K radius that we've identified in this report. And because of where it is, it might actually take them 2 hours driving to commute.
Absolutely. And that's a big compromise.
Exactly. And if you add on that cost, and we know that petrol is really expensive, I think I jumped for joy the other day when I saw that it was $1.60 because I've never seen those prices.
Tell me where.
For a long time.
I'll come up from Sydney.
And if you compare that to the cost of actually being able to run the cars and maybe multiple cars, and then the cost of having a garden and mowing the garden, a pool, the upkeep of a pool, All of those sorts of things come into play as well. So we are definitely seeing that families are now considering apartment living as opposed to a house.
And we're really creating apartments for, I feel like they used to be created with a pretty small subset of buyer in mind. And now we're starting to realize how much that market can cater to the broad spectrum of life and lifestyles. It's such a good option for people who are looking for the accessibility features, for people who are, whether they have accessibility issues or they're starting to think about, their later years or potentially that down the road going, well, this is an option where that's not going to be a barrier for me being in my home and I'd like to be in my home. And it's, really for a long time was kind of considered, the house type for a small family, one or two people in a certain part of their life. Now, apartment living is really for everyone.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I remember when apartments is for uni students sharing together, when I was going through uni, which was many moons ago, we won't discuss that, but I remember that back then, units are for uni students, right? Or as you're stepping into your professional years. Whereas now, units are becoming more family friendly. And we are actually starting to see apartments that are specific for aged care as well. And, those particular apartments have health style, living, they have nurses, they have doctors on site, all of those sorts of things. And I think in particular, when we're looking at costs versus, what you're going to sign up for, even in this report, like if I look at some of the suburbs where we've said, look, these are the affordable suburbs that I can give you that will tick the boxes. In Sydney, for example, there's still over $1 million. I mean, yes, it's still far away. So, for example, one of them, Granville, is 1.1, which is like a $500,000 discount to the $1.5 million of Sydney Metro. But that's for a house in Granville. But a unit in Granville is about, median price for unit is about $550,000. And so you sort of think about, well, do I commit to a $550,000 mortgage or, 80% of that? Or do I commit to a $1.1 million purchase price and then 80% of that is owned by the bank? So, what are my repayments going to look like? How is it going to impact my cost of living on a month-to-month budgeting? All of those sorts of things. And so there is still quite some gaps between unit prices and house prices.
It's true. And we've seen that change a little bit, particularly over this year where we've seen, more price growth acceleration in the unit market. But there's certainly, as this report shows, and as other data points have revealed, there's definitely still that opportunity there. And it's something we really like to call out. Now, Asti, I know that you had sort of digging into the data a little bit more. You had a little bit of, should we say, trouble sort of nailing down some of the spots in Brisbane to call out. Can you tell us about why that was and maybe share with the listener some of those suburbs that you did end up identifying as livable and affordable?
Yeah, definitely. So I was actually quite surprised at this because, we talk about affordable. And Brisbane has more so traditionally been known as the more affordable option compared to Sydney and Melbourne, right? And then suddenly it became harder for me to actually find an affordable and livable suburb. And it was actually down to the fact that we've layered the project development criteria.
Oh, interesting.
So it's because we've layered that whole must have new residential stock coming in criteria. So that was the part that made it really hard for us to nail down suburbs in Brisbane, because I was starting to kind of go, okay, so, normally I like to kind of go, I like being able to say to people that I'm able to find suburbs that is half the price of the metro, or like can give you a 400,000 discount, or, something quite significant like that, right? Whereas with the one in Brisbane, I found that I had to inch quite closer to the median house price to be able to find suburbs that will have some sort of supply planned with development approval into the area. So a really good example is that, and thankfully with this one, we've been able to find it in different parts of Brisbane. Inala and Dara, for example, which is more south, has a median price of around 700 to 770, made it in the cut. And even then, in terms of number of supply, there's only 1425 new houses or townhouses coming into the area. On the north side, we've got Zilmere, 825 in terms of median house price, with 16 odd townhouses coming to the area. So, it was actually quite difficult being able to find the cheaper suburb as much as possible while still ensuring that there's going to be that new supply. And even when we're able to find the new supply, it's still quite minimal. And it's in a massive contrast to places in Sydney and Melbourne that we've been able to identify, which was much, much easier.
Tell us about some of those suburbs. We talked a little bit about Sydney, but in Sydney and in Melbourne, let's have a look at some of those Melbourne suburbs where they do actually have quite a robust supply coming in the pipeline.
Yeah, and this is what I mean by the difference. I mean, in Melbourne, a comparable price is Mill Park for houses, and median house price is about 760, 770. And remember how I said the one in Brisbane was Dara and Inala was around that price level, and they only had 14 to 25 new houses coming, whereas in Mill Park, we have 296 units and townhouses coming into the area.
Wow.
And that's what I mean by it was quite difficult for us to nail down those Brisbane suburbs just because of the level of residential supply. In Melbourne, Broadmeadows made it into our report, much cheaper than the ones in Brisbane. So 570 with 176 townhouses coming in. Albanvale, 625, median house price, 180, a new supply coming in. So even in the affordable suburbs that we've chosen, as you can see, there were actually some that was more expensive in Brisbane when you want to ensure that there's new stock coming in.
And that's such an important part of the picture, as you've explained. Asi, some really great insight there. We're going to pick this conversation up after another break. Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Top 100 Agents. Before the break, we were digging into the latest results of PRD's affordability and livability report. Some really, really interesting information, Asi, that you've been walking us through about where are these suburbs scattered throughout these major capitals that have that potential to be affordable for people to get into, whether that's a foot on the property ladder or, maybe it's not their first home purchase, but they're really prioritizing that affordability aspect, but they don't want to compromise on livability, on being able to have amenities around them. And it's been so, so interesting to find what you heard in this latest report. Now, I have a bit of a question because obviously, at PRD, you're a big real estate organization and you have a lot of real estate professionals associated with you. I'm curious to hear, why do you feel this is such a important part of what you do at PRD, and how does it help sales agents, real estate professionals do their jobs well?
So when we talk about PRD, we stand for Property Research and Development. And when it comes to the property market, buying a property is such a big part of the Australian infrastructure, right? That's what most people do. But it's also the most costly asset, the most money that you're going to invest in. And we've seen so many times of people not being able to pay their mortgage, or they've overcapitalized, or, they're not able to find what they need, or they are, but then they didn't realize about the value, and then they get in trouble and all that sorts of stuff. And at the moment, with everything that is going on in the economy, consumer confidence have dipped quite severely, to be honest, because of the cash rate hikes, the cost of living. At the moment, we're seeing sticky buyers because they're kind of ahing about the economy. We've had a stable cash rate since November last year, and many people are a little bit hesitant about, are they going to buy now? Are they going to invest now? Or are they going to wait until next year for the rumored, I will say that word, cash rate cut, right? And so it's really important for property professionals to have data in front of them, because that's one of the ways that you can guide your clients to make the decisions that they are going to be making and commit to these huge numbers that they're going to have to pay for the next 25, 30 years. And we've seen the stress that people went through when the cash rate hikes started happening and mortgage repayments started to balloon. And so, it's really important for property professionals to have the latest data to make sure that they're aware of other places that their clients might not have heard of or might not have thought of. And we know that there's been an increase in buyer's agency in the real estate world, and they've been really helping people, think outside the box on maybe not that suburb, but maybe the 3 suburbs down the road. Or maybe if and that's for an owner occupier. If you're an investor, then instead of Sydney and the surroundings, maybe go to Brisbane. And instead of Sydney houses, maybe go to units in Brisbane. Because if you look at this particular report, you can literally see that the Sydney affordable, livable, chosen suburbs that we've given have a rental yield of about 5.7, 5.9%. And units in Brisbane are also returning about 5.8, 5.9% in rental yield. But the units in Brisbane is still about 40%, 50% cheaper than houses in Sydney or even in Melbourne. And so having these sorts of comparison in front of you actually does allow real estate professionals to guide their clients in their investment, whether as an owner-occupier, whether as a landlord. It's about building that trust because the numbers are in front of you and you can use those numbers to guide them in making that decision.
It's so true. And look, we've talked a little bit about what we know buyers are hoping to see in the year ahead. And certainly what buyers are hoping to see is also what we at REB and at the property team at Momentum Media are keeping an eye on, and hope to see, some of that health coming back into the market in some ways. But Asti, tell me, what do you think will be the biggest indicators next year for a level of change across the property market? Dare I even say potentially some easing in some of the circumstances that we've seen?
I love this question because I think everyone was talking about a potential easing at the beginning of this year.
I know, it's
and
true.
We didn't see it happen at all, did we?
No, we did not. We did not. We can always hope. But I suppose, we like to look forward with a bit of what would be the indicators that would tell us good things are happening or good things are on the horizon?
So one of the good things for next year that I actually think we're pretty much on track on is the inflation rate. Because the cash rate, whether it goes up, down, steady, fully relies on inflation rate. I mean, it does take into account our wages as well, like our wage growth, but our wage growth have stagnated for the past 6 months or so. The one that is still giving us a little bit of that uncertainty and a bit of angst sometimes is the inflation rate, whether it goes up, whether it goes down, all of those sorts of things. At the moment, we're in a good place. We're just outside of the healthy 2 to 3% that the RBA would like us to be in. And all indicators are pointing out that as long as everyone doesn't go too crazy, over the Christmas and the school holiday period. And I know I'm guilty of this. I have an 8-year-old and, holiday periods
Yeah,
happen.
absolutely. You want to have those presents underneath the Christmas tree and have an exciting holiday.
Exactly. But the RBA is aware of this, right? That there's always normally a little bit of a jump during these phases. But normally around this time of the year, definitely your entertainment spending, your discretionary spending, your food, restaurants, all of that goes up in terms of spending. And that does all add up because that makes up the basket of inflation rate. And so even if that does go up slightly, because of the cost of living that is happening right now, and I have seen so many posts on my social media about how to do Christmas more affordably this year and like how to recycle things for Christmas and things like that. We have that as kind of like our moderator when it comes to spending for this year, which means that it then points to a level of inflation rate that shouldn't go up too much in the new year. If anything, it might hold steady or it might just have a small jump. But the RBA is already aware of that, right? Because they've obviously been tracking consumer behavior for as long as they've been around. And so as long as our inflation rate remains within this level that we currently have and also in the direction that the RBA is expecting, then that's going to be a really good indication of any easing in the monetary policy. Many people have actually asked me, why haven't we cut cash rates, whereas other countries have? So, for example, Canada has, UK, USA, even our friends across the ocean in New Zealand have as well. And the reason is, if we look at it, we go way back to 2022, we were also about 6 months late in the cash rate hike game. So the US did it first, and then we didn't follow until about 6 months on, right? So right now where we are in November, we're about 3 months or so behind the US, and the RBA is not going to meet again until February. So by that time frame, around that February, March, then we're also 6 months behind in the cash rate cut game, if that makes sense. So in terms of a time cycle, sort of like time frame, it makes sense if we were 6 months behind before for us to also be 6 months behind now. So there are some more positive sort of signs there for a possible easing. But at the same time, though, I always say that even if the RBA does cut its cash rate, it's never a guarantee that the bank that you're with is also going to cut their interest rates. Because even now, with the cash rate being held stable, there are some banks that are holding it stable, some banks have cut, some banks have increased. Whether mortgage or savings rate, they've played around based on their own financial needs. So I think if an easing does happen, it's probably going to be such a big news item and such a big force that a lot of the banks will follow. But to what extent is what we don't know. So that's what I can say on that.
Absolutely true. And we will be keeping an eye on all of that, of course, and bringing that reporting to you, our listeners. Asti, this has been such a wonderful chat. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing all of this new insight that you've released with PRD and some of the property markets that we know people will be keeping an eye on thanks to your excellent research and reporting.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. The property market, I think once upon a time, it was something that real estate professionals talk about a lot, but now it's become such a hot topic everywhere, anywhere, any occasion. I get asked about when is the cash rate cut going to come, whether I'm at a real estate seminar or if I'm at a kid's birthday party or if
I was just about to say, I bet you are the most popular person at every backyard barbecue. And I certainly get my share of some of those questions, though I could not call myself nearly as equipped to handle them as you are, Asti. Your insight is always so invaluable.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we always love having you on the show. Listeners, that is the end of our program today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like or review us on any of the major podcast platforms. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Stay up to date with the latest on our website and subscribe at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. And be sure to check us out on social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. Until then, goodbye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Feeling trapped by rising interest payments? Escape from mortgage prison with expert refinancing assistance from Finny. We have helped hundreds of borrowers break free from higher loan repayments by finding a more suitable loan. Our expert team can quickly assess your situation, and if there's a better lender available, we'll find it fast. Don't delay. Call today. Speak to a Finny mortgage specialist on 02 8866 2444 or visit our website at www.finny.com.au.